Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, December 14th, and this is the Education and Culture Committee. I'm the chair, Will Jwando, joined by my colleagues, Councilors Arbonaz and Mink, and we have two items that we're getting briefed on the schedule today. Our quarterly review and discussion of the quarterly financial report from MCPS, and an update on the FY23 staff climate survey. This is our final committee session for the calendar year, and it's a big day for MCPS. It's the day that the superintendent will deliver her proposed budget, so I'll be there tonight wearing with bated breath, and really appreciate everyone's work throughout the year. Obviously, this committee, we've worked really hard in this year to be aligned and to tailor our sessions to all the major issues going on in MCPS, and I really appreciate the work, and we're going to continue to do that. I wanted to just mention this is a key part of that, right? Especially our second issue, the climate, the workplace, how people are feeling when they show up every day. It's often said by MCPS, over multiple superintendents I've heard, this is a people business, right? You know, most of the budget goes to people, and how people feel when they show up to their job makes a big difference in how our students feel and the quality of instruction, the mental health of both the instructors, the staff, and the students. So this is a really, really important topic. I know the board was briefed, I think just last week or a couple weeks ago, and want to thank board member Lynn Harris, who's a frequent adjunct member of the E&C committee here for being here. And so really happy that we're here. I also wanted to mention, I know we have one of our education labor partners here, Lindsay Barrett from MCEA is here. Thank you for showing up. But also want to recognize our SEIU and MCAP partners. Obviously, they are a part of this too, and their members informed the climate survey. And so at some point, thanks for coming and being available, and you may be asked Ms. Barrett to come up at some point to respond to any questions that council members have. I also want to wish a very happy birthday, Birdie told me, to Dr. Moran. So happy birthday. All right, with that, I think I've gotten all that out of the way. And we have a MCPS presentation, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Ms. McGuire to go through the financial report first.
Thank you. Yes, the first item on your agenda today is a discussion of the MCPS monthly financial report. MCPS does produce a financial report every month by law, and that's delivered to the Board of Education as well as then transmitted to the executive and to the council. These monthly reports, this is the first quarter essentially, and the committee does tend to review these at least 3 to 4 times during the year. Certainly we'll look at them again in the budget time frame over the summer with the year end of the fiscal, and then in the fall with the any categorical transfers that are necessary. The purpose of the financial report is certainly to monitor in real time the financial conditions with expenditures and revenues. The school system also in this report does project the fund balance, project the expenditure and revenue through the end of the fiscal year. Now, of course, at the beginning of the fiscal year, as we essentially are now, that's a very preliminary exercise, but it is important in terms of forecasting what the current trends are for both expenditures and revenues. So when we talk about the forecast to the end of the year, if you look at the first page of your packet, the monthly financial report is reporting currently projecting a revenue surplus of $6.6 million and an expenditure surplus of $1.9 million. Again, that would be, if all conditions ended now, that would be the position that we would expect at the end of the year. Again, that will change. We know that both of those are likely to change between now and then. The school system, of course, is required by law to end the fiscal year with a positive overall amount and not to end in deficit. And so as a result, certainly when you're managing a budget of this size and this complexity, that will result in a positive fund balance and unexpended appropriation. We do refer to that unexpended operating budget appropriation as the fund balance. There are a number of types of fund balance, certainly if you go farther into the fiscal accounting and reporting, but that is sort of loosely the fund balance that we're talking about, in part because the unspent appropriated funds at the end of the year are then part of the county's resources to reallocate those to the school system for the next year or at any point in the future. In the FY24, the current budget, when the council was making those deliberations earlier this spring, the council did ultimately take a different approach to the year-end fund balance than we have seen in many recent years. And there's a table on page 2 of your packet that shows the history of the amounts of fund balance that have been reappropriated in the past several years. Because of the nature of the dynamics last year, particularly around the property tax increase and around looking at ways to minimize the impact of that, what the decision for the MCPS budget was essentially to remove that assumption of intentional significant savings at this level. Again, emphasizing that by law and by default, the system will end with a positive fund balance, and that will be, again, carried over, and we'll have similar conversations about it. But it does change the dynamics of the financial report and of the likely fiscal standing at the end of the year. So just wanted to highlight that as we go into this fiscal year. Just again, a reminder that that approach will be different. Some of the numbers that we see at the end of the year, we certainly would expect to be different, and that again, was just part of this sort of a rebalancing approach, if you will, to the idea of savings and how those savings are achieved during the fiscal year. Just one other item that I wanted to highlight. The school systems report also does raise some concerns related to the fund balance. It's a different fund balance for the group insurance fund. And certainly there is a freestanding self-insurance fund that has appropriated tax dollars in terms of the county's contribution and the school system's contribution. It also, of course, has the employee contribution as well, and that is where the health benefit claims are paid from. So again, just raising the, that's a fund that the council and the school system and the board certainly do always pay attention to, and just look at how that fund is faring in light of both the contributions and then of course claims and expenses. So again, just wanted to highlight that at this time the school system is flagging some potential concerns there to be looked at over the course of this year, and understand that the system is looking at options of how to address that over time.
Thank you, Ms. McGuire. Anything from our MCPS colleagues that you want to add before we ask you any questions? No? Okay. You've learned well. Yeah. I'll start, and then I'll turn to colleagues if they have any questions. We talked, we did a one-time $14 million contribution to the Employee Benefits Fund in June, and this is kind of, I think, where we're going, and we approved that transfer in September. The consultant's projecting at $21 million in higher costs, your healthcare consultant. But I remember we were told that there would be a savings, 10 to 12 million, I think is the number, from moving from a fee for service model. So could you just provide a little more context into what's going on there and what we expect and what we've seen? Is there going to be an additional contribution needed? I know there's been you never know exactly who's going to participate, so there's always a little variability there, but yeah. And just introduce yourself, please.
Rob Riley, Associate Superintendent of Finance. So one of the discussions we were having is what can we do to improve the situation in our health plan. One of the things we did do was a joint effort with the associations. We put out an RFP, and the realized savings were going to be $10 to $11 million over the course of this year. We are seeing that come to fruition. Most of it is in administrative fees. When we compare ourselves to, when we reach out to our other neighboring LEAs, they're actually in a situation worse than ours, and ours is getting pretty tight. But that's one of the things that we did, Councilmember Joando, was we did an RFP and we were able to secure lower pricing for those fees.
Got it. Okay, so you did see that savings too. You are
Thus
seeing.
far.
Thus
But
far.
we're not a year into it, so they said we want to wait till these claims mature before we get a full report
Okay.
from the company, which we'll have within the next month or two.
Got it. Mr. Hall?
Yeah, Brian Hull, Chief Operating Officer for MCPS. I would also just add that in addition to the 14 million that you highlighted that we put at kind of end of year savings from last fiscal year, we also included $28 million in the current year, the FY24 budget for the employee benefits plan as well. And what we're seeing is an increased number of claims as well as increased costs. And so we're working closely with Aon, our benefits administrator, to identify, what is kind of driving those two things and then what we can do internally to adjust.
Got it. Appreciate that. Thank you. The other question, I saw that there was a textbook surplus projected, $1 million or so. We approved in September as well, transferring $6 million from Category 4 to cover deficits in other categories. How are we doing in kind of estimating these transfers, and where do you see, is that just normal year to year to have that level of overage, or is there a trend we're seeing? Or?
For that particular category, that seems to be pretty consistent year to year. One of the things you will note in our Category 3, which is instructional salaries, that's where we see, at this point, no estimated positive variance, which is very unusual compared to prior years. But the category you're talking about is pretty consistent with prior years.
And I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
I guess just the ability to kind of estimate these, when we're talking millions of dollars, it is kind of hard to get it exactly close.
Well, this leads into my second question here. So there's a $1 million surplus in textbooks and instructional supplies. I visited a lot of schools. I'm often hearing from educators that they're going in their own pockets to purchase things to help with students, whether it be lighting or additional supplies. What is the process? And I don't know if this is Mr. Hall or who the right person is in this situation. Obviously, we don't want that happening. How does it relate to this surplus that we can, for teachers who are doing that? How do they request? Does it go through the principal? What's the process? And do you look at that when you have a surplus like this?
Sure. So, yes, the process would be, because of course we don't want teachers spending money out of their own pocket for classroom supplies or materials. So the process would be through the principal. Each school is provided an amount for classroom supplies and materials. And so the teacher would work with their principal to identify their needs and submit their requests. And I'll see if Yvonne has anything to add to that.
Good afternoon, Yvonne Alfonso Windsor, Director of Management and Budget. So like Mr. Hull said, the schools do get an allocation, and most of the surplus comes from schools not spending all their funding. So that's where we see, the surplus.
So this is like returned money from the school saying we didn't need it.
Correct.
So what's the process for reallocation? Because we have 211 schools. I'm sure there's great variance in who needs and who doesn't.
Correct, and we're looking at that, and we've made changes over the past couple of years on the allocations to the schools. We're looking at equities, but also to the other question that you asked, we're also looking through the budget process to make sure that we're budgeting correctly so that we don't see, this amount of transfers between the Category 4, because that's a category that we can pretty much project, right, where the needs might be. It's not like salaries where it all depends on vacancies and so on.
One of those improvements that Ms. Alfonso Windsor mentioned was when we do the allocation to schools, it's based on enrollment. So enrollment changes during the course of the year. So what we've done now is we allocate 80% at the start, and then we hold back on 20% until we get final enrollment numbers, and then we true up to that. When you give 100%, it's hard to kind of take it back if the enrollment decreases. So this is the method that we're using going forward.
Well, what I'm hearing, though, is that just if you have this, you're projecting this surplus, if there are needs at additional schools, you would redirect this money to go for that purpose. Is that correct?
So, of course, we look at the budget overall and holistically, and as was mentioned earlier, some additional unanticipated costs in our employee benefit plan, and so we would look at the budget holistically to make sure that we're addressing all of the needs, but certainly that would be a
So
possibility.
it's not cordoned off. It's not segregated, so to speak. Not a great word in the school context, but it's not just for that. You put it back in the fund and look at needs holistically is what I'm hearing you say.
Right, we would identify the highest priority needs across the budget before reallocating funds.
Well, I'll be letting that's something I'd like to follow up on as I hear it's not something I hear once, I hear a lot. So I think that's something we need to needs to be looked into, to your point of proper budgeting and just making sure that the people asking, it's getting to the right place and that we're allocating appropriately. Obviously, I know you're trying to do that, but just obviously we can continue to improve. Okay, I'm going to pass to colleagues. Any colleagues have any questions on the fiscal update? Yeah, Councilman Robinson.
Thank you. Just a general budget question. I'm just curious. So, obviously, understandably, in a system of this size, people announce that they're leaving, and so you have to backfill those positions. We have several principals who've indicated that they're leaving during the school year. How is that handled? Just curious, just from a budgetary perspective.
So that's what we consider lapse and turnover. So generally that falls to the bottom line. And in past years, that's what we've used to, Ms. McGuire was talking about the amount of savings for the next year. That would help fund that 35 million or 25 million to help balance the next year's budget. In certain situations, we will move that from central office to, if there's a need in a particular chapter or department, and use some of that lapse and turnover in the current year.
And how are we doing on lapse? What's that target looking like so far?
So, we do estimate on the front end as part of the initial budget as far as what we think we're going to see, and I'll let Ms. Alfonso Windsor speak a little bit more about the specifics to this current year budget. But yeah, we do take that savings on the front end, or the estimated savings, so that it can be strategically budgeted, and so we don't attempt to have money left over at the end of the year. We attempt to estimate that on the front end so that it's allocated out properly. And then as we see variances in that, we'll adjust. And I'll let our budget director add anything additional.
So to the current year, when we were looking at the budget for FY24, we did, account for all the vacancies that we had. So we are right now about a $70 million vacancy in lapse and turnover. But, to the principals, when we have positions like those where we have to fill them, right, we have to backfill them. If it's a vacancy, we do put money aside in a separate account to make sure that we are able to fund, those positions for the remaining of the year, even though we assume some of that in lapse and turnover. So we looked at everything holistically, but we know that there's some positions that are critical, like a principal at a school, where we're going to have to fill either with a retired person or with a higher level assignment, and we're going to have to backfill those positions. So like Mr. Ball said earlier, we look at things holistically, but we are filling. If you look at our budget right now and you look at the fund balance that we are projecting, which is about 1.6 million, without looking at the additional revenue that we're receiving on our fund balance from last year, we're pretty close this year. We're sitting pretty close to how we budgeted overall in our funding. We are going to have to make some tweaks between category, but we're coming pretty close right now.
I appreciate that. On Tuesday, the county annually received its update from our finance team on what the state projections are, and it's always awkward because it's 2 weeks before we actually get the state projections, so it's just a point in time. But the governor has been, actively signaling that this is going to be a very tough fiscal year for the state. I know obviously most of your funding comes from the county, but are there any concerns? Are there any flags raised from a finance perspective on potential state funding that may impact you all?
So our current projection for state, which is based on our relative enrollment and our relative wealth, we see flat or a slight increase based on what we're hearing so far. We'll know that soon, shortly, in January. So
That's great. Yeah. And then snow days. So, we were projected to have at least one this December. We had one, obviously, 2-hour delay. it's impossible to fully be able to prepare or plan. But just curious as to, and that led to some HVAC issues. We've had those challenges in the last couple of years, particularly with older systems that we had been putting Band-Aids on, and then they finally fail. How, from an operational standpoint and just a facility standpoint, are things looking so far?
So as far as the snow days go, as you mentioned, we never know when those are going to pop up. There's been a lot of talk about the potential use of virtual instruction during closures. That would not be necessarily for a one-day closure, but if we were anticipating a multi-day weather event where we knew in advance and could give our teachers and our staff enough warning and our students to bring their laptops home and be prepared for virtual instruction, that would be a possibility. As far as with the facilities, it is a challenge with 211 schools, some of them aging, and as you're well aware, the CIP, often HVAC replacements are the first things to get slashed. And so we are doubling down on the maintenance of our units and making sure that they're in as good a condition as we can. We also doubled the amount being requested in the CIP for both next year and the following year, specifically around HVAC, up to I think around $35 million. And so that is something that we are aware of and know that it can be very impactful to learning when there are disruptions. And so something we're working at both from a maintenance perspective, but also replacement perspective through the CIP.
Great. That's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thanks. Circling back to the question about classroom teacher supplies, how simple is the process really on the ground level for teachers to know how to order their supplies as the school year progresses? Like, how simple is the process, and do all of the teachers know what the process is?
So the schools receive an allocation at the beginning of the year, and then the principal determines how she's going to allocate that funding by her departments. And then the secretary, usually in the elementary schools, the secretary, the financial assistants, they place those orders. So it's as simple as giving the person that is making the order, what they want. If that department might need additional funding, then the principal might reallocate, or if a department is not spending as much as another departments, they can reallocate. But it's pretty simple at the school level, at that ground level, for them to place orders and provide information to the principal as to what their needs are. I used to work at school, and that's what we used to do. We used to collect lists from teachers. What are your needs? So that we can start that ordering process.
And as the school year progresses, if there's needs in the middle of the school year and so on, teachers are clear on how to get that done easily?
The schools usually have, the informational sessions at the beginning of the school year where they go through through the financial procedures and their processes on ordering, requesting reimbursements, and so on. And it's part of a financial manual.
Okay, thanks. Also, separate topic, MCPS switched to Cigna to save money. Understandably, obviously, we're looking to save money. However, staff were told that they were going to be able to keep their doctors and their providers, and there have been significant issues with people's providers not accepting Cigna. So what have you done to work with Cigna or to otherwise address those issues?
So we have discussions with Cigna on a weekly basis, especially part of this transition, right? So during the RFP process, one of the requirements was we needed 95% coverage with in-network doctors, which the latest data that Cigna provided us is that we're at 98%. Of course, there's another 2% out there that are having to change their providers. So that's kind of what we're hearing now. We did just recently do a survey of all of our the folks that switched to Cigna just to hear what everybody's saying. That just went out recently, so we're going to hear back from our survey results and determine what we can do to address that. But you're right; it's not going to be 100%, but they did meet the requirement of at least 95%.
Gotcha. Well, appreciate you following up on that and seeing what you can do to help improve the experience.
Yeah. So so what happens is the contracts with the different doctor groups come up a couple times a year, and it's during that time where during negotiations between Cigna and those groups, that there might be issues with finding a right price. That's where we can kind of step in, not part of the negotiations, but we can work with Cigna to say, hey, this is very important to our members that we have these particular groups in the plan.
Gotcha. Thank you. Last question. This is tangential, but has to do with the middle college programs done in partnership with Montgomery College. So under Blueprint, students who are enrolled in the middle college dual enrollment programs incur no costs for their fall, winter, and spring classes. Montgomery College waives 25% of the tuition. MCPS covers everything else, so 75% of the tuition, and then the fees and the books and so on. But there are some students who are participating in the middle college programs who need to attend classes during the summer to fulfill their degree requirements, such as general engineering and the general studies STEM programs, for example. So there are, at this point, some students who still have not been able to pay off their remaining tuition from the summer programs, and so they're having issues with signing up. They have a hold for trying to sign up for spring classes. So curious if you have thought, that seems like just a gap, like a loophole that was missed in the Blueprint legislation. Hopefully we don't need to go to the state, though, to get that remedied. Is that something that you could work out with Montgomery College to find a way to make sure that those costs are taken care of? It's not a huge amount. It really seems like more of a logistical issue.
So we can certainly look into that. To your point, I think that the way the law was written, we would not receive state funding for those students or anyone who takes classes over the summer. And so, of course, it would be left to the county to fund that, but certainly something that we can look at if that's a challenge for some of our students.
That would be great. I can follow up and make sure that you have the details, since this is obviously a pressing issue for some students who are trying to enroll in classes now. That's why I'm bringing it up here, just so everybody knows, this is an issue for cumulatively our Montgomery County students that we need to get taken care of. Hopefully, nobody here wants to be bringing up more expenses, but we also don't want that falling on our kids, obviously. So thanks very much.
Thank you. All right, I think we can. Oh, I did want to flag one other thing, and then we can move on to the next one. The Category 7, the Student Personnel Services. So could you just outline the increased expenses related to the international enrollment? And I know I saw there was a $150,000 deficit in that category. Could you just talk about what that is related to? I think I might know, but I'd like to hear you say it.
Sure. So that is one of our smallest category in terms of money, obviously. So we have seen a great influx of students that, through the international students. And since they come over the summer, the office has to provide overtime for their employees to be able to move those students quickly. So that where we saw a lot of increased expenses this year for that. So that's what we're showing that deficit. And we'll correct that through the budget process, we
try to
realign
estimate
funds.
that going forward.
Correct.
Because we've still seen kind of a steady increase. I know we're seeing it in other, HHS is seeing it. So I'm assuming we're still seeing that influx.
It's usually the majority of the expenses occur at the end of the summer between August and September. Right. Then after that they taper off, but that's when we really want to move. We have a huge quantity of students, amount of students coming through, so we want to expedite the process as quickly as possible to get them in the school. Yeah. So that's where we are seeing that rising need.
Well, I'm glad you moved the money. Obviously, we want to take care of that. So, okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. We, as Ms. McGuire said, we'll come back to this and more updates to come. But thank you all. So now we'll switch to our second item, the MCPS Staff Climate Survey results. So everyone who's here for that, come on down. You're the next contestant. And if you could just introduce yourselves for the record, and then that way we don't have to do it again.
Okay. Stephanie Sharon, Chief of Strategic Initiatives.
Good to see you.
Peter Moran, Associate Superintendent in the Office of School Support and Wellbeing.
Happy birthday again.
Keisha Addison, Director in Shared Accountability.
Good to see you. All right, I think turn over to staff. I think we have if you want to tee it up in any way and start the presentation.
Thank you. So this discussion has been one that has come up in a couple of different contexts, and the board did receive a presentation and an update from, I believe, the same panel last week. But last year, the school system did reinitiate a practice of implementing and administering a climate survey to all staff. And of course, as you restart something, sometimes you have to continue to work that through. And I think some of the discussion is around how to increase the participation in that as it's implemented and rolled out this upcoming year. However, that said, the system did release and report the results of that survey in a memorandum form over the summer, and again recently had the update to the board. The information in your packet and that will be presented today is disaggregated by race and ethnicity. All of the school level data is available on the website, and so people can look up on the website their own school or any school that they're interested in. We did also compile, just for another comparison look, the data by elementary, middle, and high school, and that table is also in your packet, just again to have another lens on the information. So this really, again, is just to discuss the results of that survey, again, what changes and steps and measures the system is taking to address and support schools as follow-up to the results, and then what we anticipate in the coming year.
Thank you. Turn it over to you.
All right. So I believe we have our slides. If you could, thank you, Essie. Ah, there we go.
There we go. Good.
All
It
right.
happened from behind the wall. There you go.
Well, first off, just want to express our appreciation to have the opportunity to be in front of you and have a conversation about such a critical topic. And I want to echo what Councilmember Jawando started with. How people feel and teaching and learning go hand in hand. And when people are feeling positive, they're more productive, they're more creative, they're more innovative, whether they are a teacher, whether they're a student, whether it's a cafeteria manager. It impacts how they work and of course, then how our students learn. So I just want to acknowledge that and make sure that, we're focused on that throughout this conversation. So as you are aware, we are at a time and a place where school climate has become and must continue to be the focus of all of our work. The climate of the school system, the climate of a cluster of schools, the climate of one school is the responsibility of all of us. We have a shared responsibility in that climate, from the bus driver that starts the day by greeting students as they get onto the bus, from the main office staff as they walk into the building and they greet our parents and serve them and help them get what they need, to the teachers that are collaboratively planning together and engaging to create effective lessons for our students, to the associate superintendent or the director that's delivering feedback to a principal. Really all of us, and including our county council members who respond to the public and support our school system. All of us play a role in the climate of our schools. Therefore, it's our shared responsibility to care for one another, to demonstrate compassion and understanding, because we know that positivity that I spoke about is transferable, and it transfers through our schools in either a positive way or sometimes in not a positive way. And as adults, it transfers to the people really that matter most, and that's our students. A key to improving school climate is an understanding of what it is and what it isn't. And this is a quote right here from someone who has done significant research in culture and climate. And we are administering, we have a history of administering a climate survey. This coming January, we're going to be administering a culture and climate survey. So it's very important, I think, for us to know the difference between those two things, because sometimes people, blur the lines and merge those things together. And so, culture is our norm behavior, as you know, the habits that an organization establishes over time and how it communicates, collaborates, and behaves. And as you can see in the quote, put very simply, the culture is our brand, right? And the climate is how our brand makes us feel. So finally, the way to strengthen climate is by really changing our norms, changing our habits, and changing our behavior. So I just wanted to frame it up for us there. Dr. Addison and Mrs. Sharon are going to speak about the collection of data, how it was collected, analyzed, and what were the results of it and the implications of that. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Addison.
Thank you and good afternoon. Can we pull the slides up again and go to the survey findings, please?
Yeah, I think there we go.
All right, thank
Okay.
you. So as Dr. Moran shared, climate is related to culture, and it refers to our norms and values and beliefs. And it's important to note that climate is complex and multidimensional, and it's influenced by culture. And so before really delving too much into the data, I just want to reiterate what Ms. McGuire shared in terms of the history that we have as a district to ensure that we are collecting feedback. We always value the voice of those that we serve, be they students, families, and staff. And this most recent school year, we returned to staff. And while the Maryland State Department of Education has a survey that we administer at the school buildings, we as a district have always engaged in ensuring that we're collecting stakeholder feedback and those we serve in the sense of the environment of the school or the climate of that school. And so for this climate survey, for the results that I'm about to share, it was developed using research-based items and in collaboration with our association leadership. The survey followed a different scales. So we had a scale of belonging, well-being, equity and inclusion, and climate. And so the items on this slide, and it's kind of under the banner, are specific items highlighted from the survey. But I just would be remiss if I didn't share that it wouldn't be appropriate for us to judge an office or a school based on individual items. We would want to look at it holistically and look at what are the areas of improvement and what are the areas where we're doing well. And so on this item, on this slide, are specific survey items. To the right are the survey items, and to the are the survey questions, and to the left are the percentages. And it's organized to show the results from the central office or non-school-based survey and the school-based survey.
Just to ask, you maybe you're about to say this, but do these correspond to the 4 questions?
Yeah, so under the banner, the first section, the 75.8% and the 73.6%, the banner's covering it. That's focused on the question related to belonging.
Okay.
The next one, just to make it easier for those who are watching, the
millions watching at home.
78.9% and the 70.7% are related to the question related to respect.
Got it. Okay.
Yep, so it kind of follows that pattern. The other thing I want to just point out for you related to the questions, you see the words in blue. Those words are to indicate that the difference for the non-school-based survey. So there was intentionality to make it relevant whether you're in a school-based setting or a non-school-based setting. And so again, these items were just to highlight some areas related to belonging, respect, positive work environment, and safety. And the intent was to ensure that we had an opportunity to learn both from non-school-based staff and school-based staff their perceptions around and their experience with regard to these items. One thing I want to also add is the scale. There was a Likert scale, 4-point scale that was used for response, and what's on this slide is the positive end of the scale. So the scale ranged from not at all, somewhat, quite, and extremely. And so when you look at that first item, overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? Looking at the purple number, 73.6% of staff who responded from a school-based side said that they quite or extremely felt like they belonged in their school. And in comparison, 75.8% of staff who responded to the survey responded on that positive end of the scale.
And not to interrupt, but just briefly, I did want to mention that the slides are also reproduced in your packet. So again, appreciate the sort of narration for folks watching at home, but council members and others who may have the packet would also have that information there.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving to the next slide. It's hard to see the blue on this one. This is an opportunity to show the results disaggregated by race ethnicity. So one of the things that we're intentional to do in alignment with our anti-racist audit in terms of looking at what are the response differences we might see by racial ethnic group for staff who responded to the survey. And so this slide provides you an opportunity to see the difference between schools and non-school based or central office staff. Next slide, please. Again, we transition to additional statements that are on the survey. Again, it's hidden, but each bullet, it kind of goes in order. So the first section shows the response percent for thinking deeply about a race-related topic. The second is related to being excited about work. The third, major news events. And the last one is examining data in their school or office. Next slide, please. And so again, taking an opportunity to show the data by race ethnicity for the items on the previous slide. And so now I'll turn it back over to Dr. Moran to share more about the supports provided to schools related to climate.
Thank you. If we could go to the next slide, yeah. So essentially what you're looking at right here is just a graph that has standard and supplemental support. So essentially what the Office of School Support and Wellbeing does is, in alignment with the Office of Strategic Initiatives, we examine those same 4 key questions that were shared by Dr. Addison about belonging at your school, respectful relationships, how positive is the working environment, how safe do you feel in your school. So based on those percentages of staff that respond not at all or somewhat, we respond by engaging the principal, administrative team, and instructional leadership team in a discussion to determine the level of support that is needed to that specific school. These discussions are driven to ensure that we understand the full context of this data, exhibiting an understanding that it is one survey that indicates how staff feel at that precise moment. The collection of additional information can be done through the most basic yet productive practice, one that we really need to make sure that is one of our norms, as we talked about, is really just engaging in focused discussions to gain a deeper understanding, to identify what immediate steps can be taken to solve the problem. To be effective, these focus group discussions must be followed up with immediate action and a communication of commitments to habits or norms that will change and how and when they will change. To improve climate, these actions that demonstrate active listening are, of course, essential. As a result, directors and associates determine if they will provide, as you see on this graph, standard support or supplemental support. For example, you'll see under standard support, currently we're engaged in 4 formal supervisory visits that are aligned with the implementation of our school improvement plan, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And we are in the middle of our second supervisory visit right now, wrapping those up prior to the start of the new year. In both of those visits, the question that's been asked at all 211 schools, one of them is, how are you collectively addressing your culture and climate goal in collaboration with your triad? And the term triad, just for anyone's knowledge, is posted on this slide. It's a team of 3 or more people that represent our 3 unions, as mentioned at the opening, SEIU, MCEA, and MCAP, that address culture and climate-based issues through monthly scheduled meetings and informal check-ins as needed. The functioning of this team is a significant determinant in strengthening school climate. It must function from a proactive stance as opposed to a reactive stance. These are strong relationships between the 3 representatives provide the continuous dialogue that's needed, resulting in anticipation of problems as opposed to, again, reacting to problems, seeing them coming up and getting in front of them, and allowing for the collaborative solutions to be introduced while the school climate is steered in a positive manner. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you, Essie. So every school improvement plan across all 211 schools has a culture and climate goal. And this was an outcome of the anti-racist audit. And this is the first time a goal focused on culture and climate has been included in the school improvement plan process. This is something we're proud of, that we've made this shift this year. The achievement of this goal is determined based on a specific set of actions, which I will talk a little bit more on the next slide. But I wanted to take the opportunity to frame this through a story of a specific school, and that school is Oakview Elementary School. They have a school climate goal for both students and staff, and they've done an exceptional job that I think we need to look at these schools that do an exceptional job, and how do we norm that across 211 schools, going back again to the cultural implications. But as you can see on this slide, Oakview has established a goal that is focused on increasing the sense of belonging for Black and African American students and increasing the access that Hispanic and Latino students have to a trusted adult. For the staff climate goal, they're focused on one of the key questions overall: how positive is the working environment at your school or office? The development they took to establish these goals, I think, is important to note, and the actions to meet them went through the following process. Administration looked at the results over the summer, and they themselves completed a thorough self-reflection of these results and identified ways that they directly impact climate to make changes. They shared those with their entire staff. I think that level of vulnerability is necessary to improve the climate of a school. The same process of self-reflection was conducted with the instructional leadership team. The process resulted in the administration creating commitments to school climate, which again they shared with their staff, and then the entire staff establishing their commitments to climate. These commitments extended across multiple questions. However, in alignment with the SIP and a positive working environment, the staff made commitments publicly to many things. Just to give you a couple of examples, we listen with an open mind and a meaningful and non-judgmental way. We check in with staff from time to time. We actively listen without holding judgment and need to speak. And the need to speak, we practice empathy. I share these commitments with you because developing a shared commitment and honoring that commitment is how we change school climate. It's important that as educators, as the adults, we recognize that in order to change the climate of a learning environment for students, we have to change our behaviors. We can't expect, the students to change their behaviors, families to change their behaviors. We have to model what we want to see in our communities, and we need to take that leadership responsibility. So finally, we all have to ask ourselves the critical question: how do my actions contribute to a positive school or office climate? Next slide. So this is the action plan that I referred to on the last slide. This is taken directly from a school improvement plan, and this is their action plan to meet their culture and climate goal. You will notice here that one of the first actions is professional learning on relationship building and community engagement with students and families. I think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that we were isolated from one another for nearly 2 years. And we do need professional learning and to engage in conversations about how to develop relationships, about how we engage with our community. That's been a key component to our anti-racist audit, is that the traditional methodologies of engaging communities of different races has been proven ineffective, yet we've kind of maintained that same traditional practice for years and years and years, thus isolating certain groups that need to have a seat at the table. While we have returned to a pre-pandemic environment, we still see these needs play out. So a specific action on this action plan that was demonstrated by this school was not relying on one data point in time, and I go back to the idea of like one survey, but by collecting additional survey data and having additional focused discussions with staff and students and families at the conclusion of the first marking period, at the conclusion of the second marking period, so that you're taking the temperature throughout the course of the year, as opposed to finding something out when you are relying on one single data point. In addition to this group also leveraged the anti-racist findings to engage in discussions with students and families that represent different racial groups, to ask them how they define positive relationships and how they define what is engagement with their community and what's the best way for them to engage, and then being responsive and putting those actions then into their school improvement plan so that the community actually plays a role in the development of the actions that will be taken. And so this additional data has allowed for school leadership teams to determine the impact of their action plans and continue to modify them throughout the course of the school year. And now I will turn it over to Mrs. Sharon.
Good afternoon. So I'm not going to go in a ton of detail about the office work, but I want to note that it very much so mirrors the work that the schools have been doing around how we unpack climate in offices as well, because the work that the offices are doing is just as critical. So similar to school improvement planning, offices are all required to have an office improvement plan. So when they received their office or department results, they also engaged in work with their teams in their departments in which to unpack the data, take a look at it, and identify goals and actions in order to address the work. Additionally, in October, at the administrators and supervisory meeting that we held, there was additional feedback collected to gain even more insight into what the survey data was communicating to us for both schools and central offices, because as we know, that information is very closely linked, what happens between central offices and schools. The superintendent's core team has taken a look at all of this feedback, and they have analyzed it, and they are actually in the process of developing some new structures and practices in order to address some of the issues that have come up, particularly when we think about work-life balance. One such action that they recently implemented was, and it sounds small, but it's actually had a very large impact on the staff, is no emails after 6 p.m., and no emails on the weekends unless we're obviously dealing with an emergency situation. This has, by the feedback that we've gotten, greatly impacted the work-life balance for staff and that 24/7 feeling that people have around their work, particularly in central office. Additionally, we're working on creating onboarding opportunities for central offices. That rang true loud and clear. And we're right now looking at best ways in which to improve and enhance those onboarding practices and procedures. Additionally, we have engaged in communities of practice team where there's internal and external experts giving some guidance and feedback on the data. And all central services leaders also engaged in a leader learning activity to learn about specific strategies that they can implement in their offices in order to improve climate. And we're also in the process of revisiting our Culture of Respect Compact between the associations, the Board of Education, and MCPS, which has served as a foundational document that we are in the process of revising and rolling out. So again, our focus remains on a positive culture for teaching and learning, and that we do recognize that this is an adaptive challenge that we have to continuously revisit and collect and engage in continuous conversations and reflection on. Next slide, please. So as we think about, was that the next slide? Was there a slide before this one? Okay. All right. I thought there was a slide in between. So I do just want to point out before I get to this that all of our data, including the central office data, is found on our shared accountability website so that people can see that. I want to make sure they know that. That's where we post it. We do want to be transparent about our information. As Dr. Addison noted in her comments, these are the 5 areas that we are going to continue to focus on as we continue in FY24 of expanding our survey collection, data collection from not only staff, but also including parents and students in that survey collection. If we go to the next slide. So, in the new year, we are going to be launching a full administration of climate surveys. This is going to include our staff survey. It is also going to include our family and student surveys. We are in the process of finalizing our questions. We want all of the questions to align across the board in those 5 categories that were identified. We have been in the process over the past month or so of engaging our association partners, our teachers, our principals, our students. We had a really robust group of students and community members in order to kind of take a look at the survey, give feedback on the questions, as well as the administration. So the administration method, as you will see up here, is staff will receive an email via their MCPS email address. Students will receive that. We're working on a culturally responsive engagement plan for families. What's important to note that while the staff and the students, they get this automatic email, it's incumbent upon us to provide guidance and support to schools in ensuring they create the time and the opportunity and communicate that these surveys are anonymous and are safe spaces to express their opinions so that we can make sure that we're addressing the needs. Right now, as far as the family, we really want to make sure that we have as many families that participate in the survey as possible. And traditionally in MCPS, when we've given surveys, we have come up against a variety of challenges. So we are really being proactive in addressing those challenges that we have heard from our community time and again. That document on the left that you see that says consider these steps for engagement are part of our family engagement policy that was recently revised last year that we're really focusing on to make sure that we have full participation from our community. So we actually have a community engagement group that has been providing feedback since the summer on how to maximize our participation of our families. We also have an amazing team of parent community coordinators that are actively working on addressing some particular barriers that they identified that we're working on overcoming. So some of the things that we have heard that we're really working on with the family and the community engagement component is making sure that we're communicating early and often. We hear that frequently, that sometimes that communication comes out late. Using culturally responsive language to explain the purpose of the surveys. In some of our communities, there is suspicion of surveys, that survey data might be used against them in some way. So making sure that we're being culturally responsive and engaging our partners in being trusted messengers around that work. We want to go to family events in order to make sure that we are advertising the survey, such as Latino parent meetings, to provide opportunities to fill out the survey. So really going into our community to do that. We heard actually from a number of members of our community that we need to add voiceovers for questions for our community and parents that are not literate in English. That could be an added help. But obviously, we translate everything as well. And our amazing parent community coordinators are going to be doing a district-wide approach to provide personal touches in communities and to parents and families, because they frequently are a trusted messenger in communicating and getting this survey information completed. And we're also going to have some workshops for families to provide them support to fill out their surveys and answer questions. And our results are anticipated to be ready in spring of 2024. We strategically did that. We had heard loud and clear from our schools in particular that when we do surveys in May or in the spring, they don't get those results until after school's out. So they're unable to unpack it with their staff before summer ends to help inform some of the summer planning that leadership teams do. So in collaboration with our associations, we moved up that survey administration to the new year. And I think that was the last slide, so I'll turn it over to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the MCPS and particularly you and your offices for doing the climate survey and the goal of doing more next year, as we just talked about with students, staff, and community. I think one of the things that stood out to me, both in the board presentation and obviously in preparing for today, is that we need more engagement with staff, both in the offices and the schools, related to their sense of belonging, feedback, and the ability to have conversation on current events. Obviously, that has risen to the fore here lately, but in multiple ways, of even without the controversy around Mr. Beedelman and that whole issue of climate. It remains at those schools. There's a larger issue with climate. So I'm glad we're having this session, and I all your comments have underscored that you understand that, right? And so I'm glad we're able to dig into it. I have a couple questions, and then I'll put myself back in the queue, because this is one of those topics where you could talk about it all day. Yeah. So participation. I did my math, which is always dangerous, as a lawyer, but 25,000 staff, 8,000 some odd responses. It's like a 34% response rate. Is that right? Did I do that right, or did I mess it up?
Close,
okay,
yes.
Right.
So for school-based staff,
Yes.
when we look at the results in terms of the total number of school-based staff and the number of survey responses received, the response rate was 43.7%. So
Okay.
it's slightly less than 20,000 school-based staff who were sent the survey electronically, and we had about close to 8,700 returns. So that gave us a 43.7 response
Got
rate.
it. So it's 20,000. I had my denominator
A little
wrong,
bit
so-
too high.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
so,
yes.
but-
And
but
then for
the
offices,
5,000 are the central office.
yes,
or central
about
staff.
round about close to 5,000. Yes.
Okay.
And so overall across both, the response rate for school-based and non-school-based was 40.3%.
Got it. And where does that stand? Like, is that an upward trend or a downward trend? I think it's a downward trend, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I think one of the factors in terms of the response rate and reflecting on what we've done in the past, one of the agreements we have with our association partners was the window was more narrow than it had been in the past. And so we know that when we have a wider window in terms of opportunities for response rates, we have an opportunity to continue to send out reminders, say, please complete the survey, please complete the survey. And so I do see, as we transition to the new year for the launch, in terms of ensuring that the opportunity
Wider
is
window.
extended. Yep, that
That'll
can
be
also
one
impact
of the
it.
strategies. I also was a little, it stuck out to me that it didn't necessarily seem representative of the staff as far as who responded, as far as race and ethnicity. That every other group other than white respondents was underrepresented in the response rate. What are you going to do to address that? And obviously, those who did respond, for example, black respondents had the lowest response to when something happens major in the community related to race or ethnicity. Do you talk about it at your school? 28% of black staff said they did. So that means 72% did not. So could you address both of those questions? How are you going to get the response rate up just to the survey itself from underrepresented staff? And then the second question would be, that's significant. Like, these are the people who are impacted the most personally by this, and are, the fact that they don't feel they're not talking about it is a problem. And obviously that translates to their ability to talk with students and to address these issues in a way that's going to be healthy. So.
All right, I'll start because I'll come from a research and logistical approach. The conversation we just had in terms of the window, the opportunity, what Ms. Sharon indicated earlier in terms of our innovative approaches, ensuring that we're reaching everyone is part of the process. I do want to go back to a statement you said, Councilmember Joando, in terms of the flip of who didn't respond from that example you gave for Black or African American, is just to remember the context that we're talking about of those who responded. So not everyone who responded felt that way. But yes, I agree in terms of our opportunity it really is around how we advertise, how we engage our staff around the importance and reminding folks that we value their perspective on this topic. So I'll defer to some of my colleagues as well.
So I'm just going to ask, in terms of increasing participation, particularly for our staff that is Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, and really just overall, is people want to know. There's the trust element that plays into any survey, but specifically into a climate survey. And I think an upgrade that we need to make to increase participation is telling people specifically what we're going to do with the results. Had we explained how we were going to use the school improvement plan as a mechanism to improve school climate, then participation may have increased. I just think we need to be very transparent about when we receive the results, what are the steps that are being taken at each different level to address them at the school and as a system overall.
No, I appreciate that. That's really important. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll put myself back in the queue here. I really appreciated the slide that was from Oakview. I'm not sure if you chose that because I went to Oakview. I don't know if you knew that. Okay, I'm sure it was. But shout out to the Dragons, the Mighty Dragons, and Principal Klein. I was there in May to pass out all of their certificates for their promotion, and the kids were. It's just an awesome school, and they've done a really, really good job at making everyone feel welcome, and that's evident when you visit there. Could you I've seen variation on that though, so what is these school improvement plans, the climate improvement plans, they're good if they're on paper, but what's the accountability mechanism from your perspective to make sure that it's actually happening?
Right. So the accountability is, our directors and associates are essentially the principal supervisors that go out and work with the principals, work with the ILTs to be a presence in the school and have periodic check-ins throughout the course of the year. An upgrade that we have made from previous years is that the school improvement plan is often just reviewed when it's submitted, and then you do a review in the middle of the year. Right. We've now established a cycle where we're going out to schools at a quarterly to look at the implementation, to monitor the implementation, to look at the data. Again, having them, and this is an example that Mr. Klein has done, is having surveys that also ask deeper questions about, and are catered towards the responses from the initial survey. So there's that piece of accountability. I think the one thing that we are working on is that as accountability goes up, trust has to go up, right? And commonly what happens is that when accountability goes up, trust has a tendency to decrease. So we're being very intentional about how we go out into schools and have those conversations. Principals want to see their climate being excellent. There's complexities at play, like you just, and I think one of the key ones is that the relationship between the community or society climate and the school climate, and how you bridge those two things and have conversations and make people feel welcome when there are certain things that are happening outside of the building and they're coming into the building. Like the school is a microcosm, right, of society, and our principals are taking on a lot of challenges. Our teachers, our teacher leaders, our SEIU members are taking on a lot of challenges that are not necessarily related to things that are happening directly in the schoolhouse.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and the ability to, the accountability is key, the trust is key, but also the information is key. And I've said this to the superintendent and to others. When things are happening in the world, to your point, we have to over prepare our school staff and the administrators and over communicate so that they have the tools that are available to have these really difficult conversations. And that's just the reality of where education is right now. We have to be in that place. So I know we're flying the plane as we grow it. I'll turn to Councilmember Albanaz first and then Councilmember May.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one bucket of questions and then put myself back in the queue, Mr. Chair, because I'll start with the climate survey of staff, and then in my second bucket, we'll have questions on the preparation for the extended survey to parents and students. Well, first, it's good you did it. I think that's obviously a critical and important step. When I was the director of the Department of Recreation, we did several climate surveys. This was around the same time we had to let go of a bunch of people, and there was a great deal of dissatisfaction at that time because people were having to perform the duties of other people who had left. And there was mistrust, and it was a challenging time. One of the things that we did was we actually got a third party to administer the survey because there was skepticism that if we, as a department, administered the survey, that would somehow cloud the results. And we're much significantly smaller operation. But there was also a concern, how or is this information going to be used to be weaponized against me in some form or fashion? And I think obviously there have been some controversial issues that have faced the school system just in the last several months. And so I know this was administered last year, but it's just something to, keep in mind is moving forward, considering the possibility of having an outside organization actually develop and administer the survey that could address some of the trust issues. When exactly was the survey administered? Like what day? Because I appreciate the comment. We had heard feedback too that there wasn't a lot of turnaround time to get it in, but when was it administered?
It was administered around April and May.
Okay.
So it was towards the end of the school year, which we've received feedback as we've engaged with school building leaders in terms of the timing of the launch of the survey also plays a factor in their response.
Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. I agree with that. And I do also appreciate the comments that, being upfront with what you're going to do with that information, I think is also helpful. But just as you're being intentional in the development of the survey to parents and key outside stakeholders, I think moving forward it would be helpful to engage stakeholders in addition to Triad, but with on a school by school basis on the development of a survey. Because if people feel like they've got skin in the game, then that may also be helpful too. I did notice, as the chair mentioned, the lack of response, and that could mean a lot of different things. Oftentimes, unfortunately, it does mean that people who are not responding to a survey are either pretty significantly disgruntled and disconnected. And so how do we follow up and rather than one point in time survey, could there be other micro surveys that we do over the course of the entire year to try as best we can? I know you are, but even more so to catch those folks who are not represented in some way in the data that you all are processing. So just any thoughts or feedback to any or all of those suggestions that I just made?
So I think the first is also, so with 211 schools and you look at their particular survey data, it varies. We have schools, and Oakview is one that we highlighted that has climate data that is, above 75% in the majority of its categories. We have schools that have 25% in a response. So how we support those schools looks different, and that's why we had that slide with just standard and supplemental support. So just some of the things that we have already been doing is, of course, the presence and the director presence in those schools is at a higher level, and the micro surveys that you're talking about is a requirement. And I want to talk about, again, the development of them. They have to be developed by the people that are actually going to be receiving them, right? Because the question has to be really, you want to know what they want you to ask them, essentially, as kind of simple as that sounds. So engaging with their instructional leadership teams, and again, I go back to the triad. One of the correlations that we see is where you have a high functioning triad that meets continuously, that informally connects, not just at standard set meeting times. They have a more positive climate. So also how you're using that structure to develop those micro surveys, to develop a response that is representative of all the different people in the building, not just specifically based off of the data and one or two people's analysis and interpretation of that data.
Thank you. And then just final two questions. Are we? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to a comment you made regarding the development of the survey and the potential for an external individual, and I couldn't let that sit out there without stating for just this conversation that the work that we do in shared accountability, and I recognize the impact of trust and perception, but I just wanted to share that we are the objective researchers and evaluators of the district. A lot of what we do, we're intentional to ensure that what we put out is reliable and valid and sound and confidential. And so we've done this work since the office's development in the 70s, right? And so I just wanted to just reiterate and provide an opportunity to allow people to understand that confidence and trust that when we do receive that information, we hold it important and we ensure that what we put together does meet the needs, and again, that confidence that will be objective in terms of what we report. So thank you.
Totally respect that, but perception is often reality. So I think just anything in addition to what you're already doing, I think could be very beneficial. I did have one other point, lost it. Don't want to waste time, so I will yield back to you, Mr. Chair, and I will come back in the queue.
All right, we'll go around robin. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. First, wanted to express my appreciation also for moving forward with this effort and the levels of outreach that you're doing. Wanted to dig into, and I also wanted to appreciate your engagement with the unions. I think that's a super important part of this, as well as your communications and the close work with each of the leaders at each individual school. Wanted to dig in a little more about the ways in which you're doing outreach to the staff at the school so that they know that they are equal partners in this work, and so that they're able to, express their thoughts as freely as possible.
So again, I'm gonna first go with the process for the development of the school improvement plan. So that is not done in isolation. It's done with the instructional leadership team, which is of course representatives of all the different departments. If it's at the elementary school level, all the different grade levels, who come into that space and speak on behalf of their teacher colleagues. So that development is done with their input, and the culture of and one would hope the culture of that building is a place where those leaders feel comfortable coming in and sharing their honest feedback that's representative of the people that they represent and lead in their departments and grade levels. I think the next thing I would just say is that, and it may sound very basic, but we need to set up, not necessarily, I don't want to use the word processes, but we need to open the lines of communication and have really clear structures of communication within our building. And so one of the things that I've seen just principals do this year that I've seen to be very beneficial is they meet with grade level teams or with departments, an English department, with no agenda whatsoever, but simply just to allow them to speak and share their feedback on their teaching experience, and then capture the themes of that, and then go back and provide actions that they're going to take to, continue with things, to stop certain things, to modify or strengthen things. You spoke about the unions. I do want to share one of the things that I think many of us are very excited about is that we are planning a professional learning specifically for triads with our partners in MCEA and SEIU and MCAP to administer, so that similar to what Councilmember Jawanda was saying, you don't have these isolated places where things are going really, really well. You're spreading those best practices across the entire school system, and that's the idea of that. I think that is one example of many other things that need to happen so that we are having effective communication in our schools. And highlighting the schools, I think, Councilmember Mink, that are also doing an exceptional job in having a culture of trust, a culture of ongoing feedback from staff that is acted upon, and highlighting them as a professional learning resource for our schools that are not. Essentially networking schools where you're setting people that have strengths with people that have weaknesses. That's the one thing about our school system. It's so large. Where we have problems, we also have solutions. It's about connecting those two places or people together.
I think all of those things are important, and I'm glad that you're doing all of them. And I would also note that I'm not hearing yet opportunities for all staff to be able to speak to central office without having leadership in the room. And in order to have an unfiltered opportunity, and make no mistake, we have so many absolutely fantastic principals, administrators, leaders across the system. As somebody who went through MCPS, taught in MCPS, has students in MCPS, I don't want to undersell that, because those positions are very difficult, and we have a lot of excellent people doing excellent work, going above and beyond. Also, there may be a handful of spaces where we really need to be hearing from staff without having some of those leadership folks in the room, and we're not going to know. We're not going to get those details unless they're being provided with that space. There are a handful of schools where, fewer than half of the respondents to the climate surveys said that. That they were, what was the question number 7, that they were something about, not confident in the leadership of the school. So right away, that's a red flag. And we've seen some results that, that correlated with some of the schools that have had issues. So this is also, I think, a liability issue to not follow up on some of that. So I would love to see you all working with the unions to help create some of those safe spaces for staff, for all staff, whoever might want to come forward and speak to central office in an anonymous fashion, confidential fashion, to come and speak to you without leadership being in the room. And hopefully you'd have lots of spaces where people will come in and say, things are awesome here, and here's something that you should be telling other schools about. But you might hear some really, really important information as well. Is that something that you all would consider doing, and starting with some of those schools where we saw really troubling answers to a couple of those key questions that relate directly to leadership?
I'm glad you raised this. So just to give you an example, and it's an example of something that I engaged in and other directors and associates engaged in 2 particular schools last spring after the results came out. I spent 2 days at 2 different schools where staff members came in, utilized an office space and essentially engaged what we call listen and learn process. And so you ask open-ended questions, you collect information. You're right, there are certain places where people need to be in a presence where they're not with the leader or the supervisor of that particular office, department, or school. And I collected valuable information, themed it, presented it to the principal, and then utilized it as a way for that person to get up in front of the staff and then talk about the actions that they were going to take based off of the feedback that I collected. I believe it has led to positive change as we've engaged in the work into this year, but that is a process that we do utilize. But I hear your feedback about it being relative to also those places where we have low response rates to find out exactly, get more information.
And also to where we see that that folks have no or only some confidence in a positive tone having been set by school leadership, for example, or the question about positive working environment, where there's few people who expressed that it's a very positive working environment. It would be great to, that's great that you're already doing it, you've already done it some, there's a precedent set there, there's a structure. It would be great to hear from you all next what the plan and the timeline is for getting into some of those other high priority schools and providing those opportunities and working with the unions to do that in a way where we think folks will actually come forward and say what needs to be
Absolutely,
said.
and that data around that key question, the positive working environment, really was the lever that initiated going in and collecting more information when we saw a low threshold in that particular question.
Great. And I would also highlight question 7, the positive tone set by school leadership. Thank you. And I'll get back in the queue as well.
All right. I will skip myself and go to Councilmember Robinhouse, and then I'll go back this way.
Thank you so much. So just again in this same bucket, the follow-up obviously is just as important as the survey itself. Could you talk a little bit more about what the follow-up will be and how you are acting upon what you've seen and what you've observed? It's not perfect, but it does tell a story and an important one.
So I do think it's important to go back to also the beginning, right? So we're talking a lot about adults, and as we should be. It's critical how adults feel. The climate also includes students, and I just want to point that out. So like when we're talking about how adults feel, right? There's implications how students feel, and one of the things that I think is important that the data we're collecting is we have questions that essentially If staff is answering a question, I have respectful relationships with my students, and it's at a high percentage. And then the students are asked, I have a respectful relationship with my teacher, and it's at a low percentage. There's clearly an interest in having a conversation around that. So I just wanted to share that in terms of around the shared responsibility piece around the climate for the student. The other thing I wanted to say, that the question around leadership. The best climates have distributive leadership models in them, where teacher leaders view themselves as leaders, and the principal has empowered them to take on leadership roles, be key decision makers in their school. So that question, often we need to make sure that we're also interpreting questions correctly. So if that question says school leadership, in some schools they may look at it as, okay, we're talking about the leadership team. We're talking about, anyone who holds a leadership role. In some schools, they may take it as just the principal. That's a question specifically about the principal. So I do think it's important that when we're going into schools and supporting, we're unpacking what the question is actually asking people and ensuring that they have an understanding. And that's some of the work that we've been doing this first part of the school year, is ensuring that we have a clear understanding of the outcome. The other thing that I would share as a principal supervisor is that school climate and school culture are part of the standards that principals are evaluated on. Standard 8 is about creating a community, a professional community that's grounded and founded on respect and strong positive relationships. So as we go out, we're engaged in observations to look for those specific leadership strategies and skills that are demonstrated or not demonstrated by a principal, and ensuring that we're holding them to the standard or expectations that have been set for all 211 out in our schools. Again, the other piece is similar to what Councilmember Mink said, is collecting more data throughout the course of the year to ensure that you're responding correctly, because there have been times where we've gone into schools where you have an 18% response rate on a specific question. They put the survey back out, you get a 75% response rate, and you see the data change dramatically. So to your point, it is accurate that sometimes people don't fill out surveys that are, not happy. There are also times where the only people that fill out surveys are people that are not happy. So I think it's also important that SEIU members are represented in the survey. Your building service managers completing it, your cafeteria managers completing it, and I think that's a lot of the work we're trying to do is more digging to get at the root cause of what is going on in specific schools or across the system to ensure that we're addressing it. I think the one thing that we have found is that it's the communication structures. It's some of the simple habits that have gotten out of process after the pandemic that we really need to return to. I keep referring to the triad process, but that was a norm across 211 schools. And when you press pause on something, the culture is impacted and needs an opportunity to, gain momentum and implement back in those processes that have been proven to work.
I agree with that. That's really helpful. And I do want to double tap on what Councilmember Mink mentioned. The survey's great, but other mechanisms, actually visiting the schools themselves, creating a time and space for people to be able to come forward, because, our unions are incredible, but not everybody always feels like they're well represented by their unions. And so just having the no wrong door just is really important here too, and have as many doors as possible, just to be able to get that feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I heard that from the other room, the focus groups, what I would call our version of formative assessments that Mr. Klein is doing, that you said that some are required to do based on their scores, which was good to hear. I think you responded to that earlier. So a couple follow-up questions. The communication, so you mentioned in January this will go out to students and families. Students will do it in the classroom, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I know you're doing this and, but just I'm thinking of my kids right now, hugely important that how that's done and how it's presented to them is critical. Because this will be the first time you're doing this, right? In a long time. I think you used to do it, but it's been a minute. Obviously we don't want all right, you're taking a survey now about how you're enjoying class, and I'm going to stand by the door, right? So I just hope that could you talk about the guidance? Because it's a big endeavor it's needed information, but really important that we're doing it the right way.
Go ahead, Dr. Addison. Go ahead.
I'll start. One of the things that we've done in the past, and you're correct, Councilmember Jawando, that we've not administered surveys and obtained feedback from students in a number of years. And one of the things that we did in the past, though, was we created a scripted language for teachers to read to students to the extent of what you just shared in terms of ensuring that, one, there's consistency in messaging across all classrooms with what students hear. So part of what we're ensuring is that we create a script to say, make sure you say these things, as well as ensuring that it's relevant for all levels of students. So when we think about the elementary, the middle, and the high school student in terms of their understanding. Sharon.
Yeah, and I would just say there needs to be some quality control, not only what you say, but how you say it.
And this is exactly what I was going to say. We learned a lot through the administration of the anti-racist audit, because one of the components of the anti-racist audit was administering student surveys. And when we initially launched, we provided opportunities for staff development teachers and principals to come. We gave them a slide deck, to go over the expectations and the messaging. And what we found was that there was incredible variance when we started doing the monitoring about how it was being rolled out. So what we learned from that is that we are going to have to be very clear in our communication, not just through school administrators or teachers, but communicating directly with the students themselves around what this is, why this is important. I had a great conversation as we've been working on developing for this next iteration of surveys with our student member of the Board of Education, who has a very wide and deep reach among the student population. And we really talked extensively about how we need to directly communicate the importance of this and how this information is being utilized to all of the students, in conjunction with how we're working with the staff in order to deliver the message. And that two-prong approach will really help us, like you said, Councilmember Jawando, with some of the quality control around making sure that message gets out there. And to reiterate what Dr. Moran said, around really helping the students understand why their feedback is so important and what's going to be used for it.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and to Councilmember Albanez's point, no wrong door. If you want to do it in class, great. If not, you can do it later at home by yourself. Like there should be multiple ways for folks to fill it out. Then I just wanted to mention something about the families. I'm really concerned, again, if we're having trouble reaching our underrepresented staff who work for us, reaching underrepresented families and people who have language barrier, you go down the list, is a tall order too. But also really, really important to get their feedback. Could you talk about some of the ways you're thinking about addressing that as you roll out?
And that's where we really need to, that's what I was mentioning previously about we have a community engagement group that is working on devising what we need to do to really get out into the community and build the trust in order for them to complete the survey. One of the things that we need to do is work with our advocacy groups, our trusted partners that we know when you think about our faith-based leaders, to say those are the trusted messengers around this. I can speak till I'm blue in the face about how important this survey is, and people may still not believe it. But reaching out to our organizations where they have trusted relationships to help and partner with in communicating this out is going to be critical. Meeting parents and families where they are in their communities is going to be a critical component versus just sending an email where you need to complete this survey. Those are some of the initial things that we're talking about how we need to structure, and this is where we're really utilizing the power of those parent community coordinators that we have in the district. They are an underutilized resource that we have in MCPS. They understand their communities, they know their parents, and really engaging in those personalized touches are where we see, when we do that, where we get the higher response rates, particularly from some of our communities that don't typically respond and that we see lower response rates. It's really about making those personal connections to engage in that support and understanding the purpose of the survey, but also building that trust in what we're going to be using
Yeah,
it
I
for.
think community groups and expanding outside of the normal ones that you use. I mean, one of the things our planning department just got an award today about their work for Thrive 2050. And they have now, in the last year or so, kind of expanded who they reach out to for master plans, and they use this group called Everyday Canvassing, who's not just them, but there's other groups that do this that do door-to-door canvassing. They've contract, which is that has the trust of the community, has worked on other issues, and they got much higher response rates. So I would encourage MCPS to step out of the box of the normal groups that you're using and think about that. Because that's going to be really, really important. Particularly, and you said the PCCs are underutilized. Well, they're actually overwhelmed, and so if we're going to ask them to do another thing, I've often advocated. I'm hoping out here tonight from the superintendent's budget, even though it's always tight budget. I think they are a critical component. The PCCs and the other the PW. What's the other one? PPWs. Excuse me. Are just so critical to whether we're trying to address attendance, outreach and engagement, go down the list. And I think there's an area there where we need more, not less of them to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish and where the school system is heading. So I know you don't make those decisions, but you're involved in them.
Yes, and just to clarify what I meant by that, I'm going to rephrase my language when I said underutilized. What I mean is that they have communicated to us that they want to be involved in these processes early to get their feedback because they know how to reach
Absolutely.
the community. And oftentimes, we don't seek that group as an advising group
Right.
as much as we should.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're trying to utilize them early.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. Colleagues, Councilmember May.
Yeah, I wanted to learn a little more about the types of actions or structures that are being discussed to be implemented at different schools to improve their climate. So, can you give us some more? I mean, you talked about no emails after 6, but as you're going through this process, and each school is having the debrief, following triad meetings, and so on and so forth, to identify what changes are going to be made. What are the types of changes that are being made to address what types of issues?
So again, I think it varies by school, of course. But I would start with again, and I know this is where we are in terms of, again, coming out of a time where we weren't communicating. Working with schools on the tenets of effective communication and ensuring that they understand what that is and how they're going to communicate. There is the presence of a director or associate superintendent being a process observer in their triad meetings and listening to that feedback come in, and then providing feedback afterwards about how it's going out. There is work around transparency.
Sorry, can you explain what you meant by that last sentence?
Sure. So at the triad meeting, a director who supervises the principal being present to observe the process of the unions coming together to share their feedback, and then how they establish or identify actions they're going to take, and then how the director or associate works with the school principal and other staff to ensure that those actions are followed through with.
Just trying to understand what the actions
So
could be. And I know that obviously there's a wide range, but if you can just give some more examples.
So it could be anything from how you are determining who does class coverage, right? So how you're identifying staff for class coverage. It could have to do with the master schedule and how it's developed. It could have to do with how you are identifying teachers for leadership opportunities, which carry a stipend with them. It could have to do with how you're handling utilizing restorative justice. What are the consequences for students on specific things where staff expresses concern because they don't know. So those things all come to the triad. We then work with the principal and those units. They then identify, here's the things that were stated, here's how we're going to respond, essentially of you said, we will. That goes then back out to the entire staff.
Sorry, I'm going to pause you so I can better understand. You said those things come to the triad.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
So the
You mean
triad.
that it's brought up by who?
So the triad is the
different reps, right?
Is a representative in each school, an elected faculty representative, an elected supporting services representative,
And
and the principal.
Right.
And so those three members collect data from different people in the building. That data then is brought to the triad meeting. It is then analyzed, discussed. Some of it's contractual, some of it's not contractual, and then they together develop answers to questions and actions that will be taken, and then put those out to the entire staff in a transparent manner. So then the director or associate would be working with the principal to ensure that there's follow through on the actions that they've committed to with their other union representatives within the building.
Got it.
So that is a system, again, that some places have very high functioning ones, where it's an ongoing process where the EFR or the ESR comes directly to the principal before a problem takes place, as opposed to when a problem has already occurred or when there's an issue that's occurred. And then they're working kind of backwards. So that is one action that is consistently in place in specific schools where we're seeing the need for it. And that's what I mean about differentiating supports for schools.
And when you say seeing the need for it, that's you're starting with the question 5 breakdown. Is that right, or is it?
So it could be any of those 4 key questions. It could be around the respectful relationships. It could be around the positive tone that the school leadership team is setting. Another thing that we're doing right now is that many of our schools are participating in receiving professional learning and facilitative leadership. And one of the things that we, I think, need to work on is how to come to consensus, right? So when 3 people come together, there's interest-based problem solving. People need to be trained on interest-based problem solving, and we need to work on how to come to consensus. We've had, staff development teachers around our school system have been receiving professional
Make sure you
learning.
share that with us.
So that is another key thing that is happening right now. Actually, as we speak, there are schools participating in that professional learning right now, and we've identified those schools based off of the need for it. So that's another practice that is in place, and schools are itching to get into that professional learning.
Great, thanks. It would be great to get some kind of breakdown of what the different tools are that are being implemented at different schools, because that might have budgetary implications for us. Like if we're seeing that whatever X, Y, or Z program or policy or something that might come with a price tag, like restorative justice you mentioned, for example, that's the solution in schools that have ABC characteristics. That's something that we're going to need to be able to take into account for the budget conversation. And then also just, I think probably would be of interest to parents and the general public. So it'd be great to get, not to add another data collection item to your plate, but it would be great to get some kind of breakdown that would give us a clearer sense of that.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarez.
Thanks. So now this bucket. So, and I really appreciate the responses. So I guess, why January? What's the methodology around January versus the end of the school year versus March? Just curious, like why that time frame?
So we took a look, and Dr. Addison could add anything that I missed to this, but one of the things is we first started off, we have heard traditionally from all of our associations and from our staff that the spring is the absolute worst time to give a survey.
Okay.
There is the state testing is happening. It's the end of the year. People are stressed at usually a little bit of a higher level, and we can't get the data back to them in a time to get them to the end of the year. So we knew that we wanted to shift the focus. We didn't want to put out a survey too early in the year, because then there hasn't been enough time, right, that has gone on to really implement change. We also have numerous other mandatory state assessments and state surveys that come out in the window around March, April, and we don't want to have them having multiple surveys at once. Then we're not going to get the data we want, because no one's trying to fill out 16 surveys all at once. So that new year time frame, and when I say new year, it's not going to be like the week we get back from winter break, where we're looking towards the end of January. We got feedback. Well, first we looked at the assessment calendar, what was going on in the schools in particular during that time, and then in addition to that, we gathered some feedback from folks around, when is the best time to actually launch this. We've also gotten some feedback that that we're working through around whether or not we do a staggered launch. So instead of launching all 3 surveys at once, do we stagger it? Do we launch the staff first, and then maybe 2 weeks later we do the student and the families? We've received some feedback that we are working through in the Department of Shared Accountability to figure out if that staggered launch will yield less stress, that all 3 are happening at the same time, and will help facilitate higher numbers. But that mid-year launch really, there was multiple factors looking into that, around the timing, around when they were going to get the results back, and what others administrations of surveys and assessments were happening.
Makes sense.
I just wanted to add to connect to that, the ability of the Office of School Support and Wellbeing to intervene early is so. What essentially happens is you get these survey results in May, and in previous history sometimes you got them in June while people were on their way out the door. So we know that teacher retention is a significant issue. If you get them in January, you can receive, supports, put in practices to increase retention and hold on to teachers, where you can, intervene early, address some of those issues. You can also, the people leave after the survey data, you don't have an opportunity to have those focus group conversations. And now when it drops in January in the middle of the year, you have access to all of the people, right? So because there are often times where you want to have conversations, but people will say to you, I wasn't here last year. I'm new at this school. You have 15 people that have left, and so you're able to collect information in real time, and you're working early also, and you're also developing the school improvement plan for the next year based off of the data that was provided to you by the people that are in the building and can be part of the solution.
I appreciate that. On a lighter note, I was watching Lord of the Rings last night, and I think there's a triad in that movie, so like a reference to something. So I was thinking about that. So you all have, I think, done a good job of engaging key stakeholders, and I'm just curious as to if you could just summarize who you've engaged with, some of the Black and Brown Coalition, some of these other really important institutions that have actually been providing very thoughtful recommendations on how best to communicate with our are sometimes hard to reach families. Just who have you engaged? Have they provided feedback? And is there enough time to implement some of that feedback in the survey?
So yes, there is enough time. There was a group. This is that community engagement group that I was talking about. That is made up of internal and external stakeholders. I don't have the whole list of all of who is there. We can get that to you, but it is representative of our advocacy organizations, such as the Black and Brown Coalition. The Black Coalition for Educational Excellence is another group I know off the top of my head that is representative in that space. We also have a lot of our PCCs. And I'd have to get through the list for the rest. But that group is the group that we have been vetting a lot of this stuff through, because they have, as a result of the anti-racist audit, this group was kind of put in place, like when I think you guys heard about the reimagination of our back to school night that we did. That group did a lot of the work and the feedback around what adjustments needed to be made so that we're actually engaging our community in a much more robust manner.
Good. And there will be enough time. I know you all met recently. There will be enough time to implement some of the feedback that they provided.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I think that's it.
You can always come back. I have a couple questions. So I think you spoke to this a little bit, but I wanted to drill down. So 211 schools, and I know Mr. Hall left, but maybe one of you know, and I saw somewhere that we're now the 15th largest school district. Did we move? We were the 14th. I need to know my talking points.
I don't know all the
It's
details,
important.
but because our office also supports that we are the 15th. I learned it from our communications
Okay,
team.
all right.
Yes.
So let it be known for the millions watching at home, we are now the 15th largest school. I want to know who overtook us, but we're going to have to figure that out because we were the 14th for a long time. So of our 211 schools, there's great variation, obviously, in these survey results, depending on where you look. And it's not just at the schools, where you would expect, for example, people have talked about Farquhar going through the issues they've gone through. But this was done actually before. I think a lot of that was public. I believe this was taken. So it was still pretty alarming even before people knew. Because, we all know the impact of when other people are talking about your school, you can feel worse about it. But this was taken before that, and it's very high, 40-some% saying I'm not enjoying coming to work, and it's bad. But one of the things that I've noticed in a lot is the great variation on, do you receive feedback on your work? And I was just looking at Winston Churchill versus Blake, for example, two of our high schools, right? One in the West, one in the East. And that variation was great on that number. And I looked at some of the other schools, elementary and middle. How are you bucketing based on these responses and prioritizing? Because that one, to me, that's an alarm bell. Like if you don't feel connected and you're not receiving feedback on your work, you're just kind of floating out there, and who knows what's happening with those kids and families. How are you prioritizing these responses and then responding, and putting a plan together to figure out what's going on and try to be supportive and correct what you're seeing?
So I'll use Blake as an example. So Blake I think we have a lot of new principals, right? So Blake has a brand new principal this year, and with a new principal is what I view as a tremendous opportunity to change culture, change practice, because you have new, fresh leadership, and when you have new leadership, people often anticipate change,
right?
And hopefully, positive change is what they're anticipating, because those people go in immediately and do listen and learning sessions one-on-one with as many teachers as possible to dig into that type of data, to understand, for instance, what type of feedback it is that they want to receive. And so there's all different types of feedback. And so getting an understanding of exactly what it is that they want. We use that information. We have goal setting meetings with all 211 principals. Frequently, and in the schools that I support in Area 1, feedback has been a goal that has been explicitly written for our principals about how they deliver feedback to teachers, how they collect informal observation data, formal observation data, how they're utilizing that to support teachers and provide them, with the professional learning that they might need. And more importantly, I'll be honest with you, Councilmember Jawando, we also need to tell people when they're doing a great job.
Yeah,
And like,
absolutely.
we sometimes, you focus on so much on what's wrong, and you really also need to also focus on what's right, because where things are going right, again, I'll just go back to, there are answers in those classrooms to support someone who maybe be getting more constructive feedback. So there's the goal setting process, which is one process that we utilize, and we revisit those goals throughout the year with each and every principal. We also, with those feedback questions, have gone in, and principals, with the support of our learning and achievement specialists, have facilitated dialogues about that to get a better understanding, and then link it in the school improvement plan. So feedback is also linked in there. So
yeah, and I appreciate that. I know you're looking at all 211, but I guess my question was more, all right, are there any of these indicators for that one? For me, seems like, if the vast majority of the staff there are saying they're not receiving feedback, right? Like, for me, that would be one that I would say we really need to get in there and figure out what's going on. I'll use the example of the restorative justice work. We have categorized the schools about where they are with adoption, right? Like, is there some similar mechanism that you're using at the system level, like early warning system, whatever it, I don't want to create another system, but how are you prioritizing and delineating, realizing that resources are not infinite?
Right.
So how are you doing that?
So they're all, with 211 schools, we take those 4 key questions and utilize an algorithm that produces essentially
you do
like
have that.
Yes.
Okay.
So and
that's what's prioritizing.
Yep. And then
who
with
needs
those,
the most help.
right, and then with those that data, we then essentially prescribe a specific set of actions, which Councilmember Mink asked for, and we can deliver on that for those schools that
Where's
fall
that
within
list? Where's the algorithm list?
So, like, what do you mean? Where's the?
How do we see the list that you just are referring to?
So we utilize that
Internally. It's not a public document.
I mean, it is public because it's based
Well,
on
all
the
the
4
data is
questions.
public, yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's based
So
on
you
those
we
specific
could-
questions.
Okay.
And then we utilize that to. But the other thing I want to point out is what we're seeing also is that we have 19 acting principals.
Right.
The majority of the schools that we are supporting significantly have acting principals in them. The previous principal, which had that data, have moved on.
Right.
So now they've inherited
Sure.
a climate that
Right.
is actually not entirely owned by them, because it's not their data that was associated with their leadership. So those are schools that we're spending a tremendous amount of time in to support with school climate. So there is a correlation between the acting principal and the school climate data.
Got it. Okay.
But we do absolutely, there's no way you can provide service to 211 schools. And that what was on that slide in terms of the supplemental piece is what we provide to schools that we know need it based off of that data and then other data that we're collecting.
Got it. All right. Well, I figured you had to be, prioritizing in some way. So that's good to know. Okay. Any other questions from colleagues at this point? Okay. I mean, as I said, we could go around all day, but we appreciate and this is something that we'll obviously be coming back to, because we'll have a new assessment in January that will be also students and families. So you expect to get those results and have a report to the board, which we always like to work with our board colleagues to let that happen first. But what's the timeline for that again? Or maybe you haven't said it, but what's
Spring.
the time? Spring.
But we haven't narrowed it down farther than spring.
Okay.
So as soon as we get that information based on the survey window, unless Dr. Addison has another additional comment about
Because I
that,
know
we will
I
let you
don't.
know.
So, what I'd like to do for our staff, Ms. McGuire, is like once they do have that and it happens with the board, let's come back and talk about it again and see where we are. And you'll have learned things a lot more, because you'll have students and parents. And then hopefully we'll have seen some improvement. I would ask that you be able to demonstrate where things have gone in relation to the previous year, in some way. I think that's important to know. Obviously it's not apples to apples because there's different principles, but we still, the buildings are there and the people are there and most of the staff are there. So we want to be able to look at that. So that would be great. I think Councilmember Mink has another question.
Apologies. Yeah, I just wanted to see if I could get a sense of if there's like how siloed are you in relation to other people who are doing other bodies of work that is going to be like tangential to school climate, who might have insights and be seeing patterns. And I'll use again the restorative justice example, where or folks who are looking at data related to like suspensions, and there might be patterns there that overlap that might save you some work as folks are going to dig in to be like, what are the changes that need to be made? Is there a way that you are communicating or have open doors and open channels to try to benefit from some of the work and knowledge that folks in other pockets are doing?
Yeah, so the way that we deploy our resources, and we're fortunate we're the Office of School Support and Wellbeing. So the restorative justice folks, the PCCs, the learning and achievement specialists, all those people, we work in the same office. So to not duplicate efforts and have people going out and utilize your resources in an efficient way, to go back to your comment about even facilitating discussions with staff to collect feedback with the absence of certain folks. Restorative justice has been key to facilitating those conversations when done in groups. And then come back with themes. The suspension disproportionality piece, there's a climate connection to that as well. And I think that when we get these student results and putting that data next to the suspension rates at certain schools will be very telling about when a student talks about their experience. I think we'll be able to utilize that to triangulate those three pieces of data to provide further intervention. And I do want to say, we have a tremendous amount of work that we're going to be doing. We have a tremendous amount of work in front of us. So I think also, like the next time we come back and have a conversation, you'll hear more about how interventions have changed because we've collected more information. And when you have three sources as opposed to one, and hopefully you get a larger return on the response, you just have a greater wealth of data and therefore a better understanding of how you can resolve problems and support people.
Kind of great. And then the other kind of bucket would be wherever staff would be sending their complaints to. And we know, as we've talked about, and as related to the Beetleman issue, that there are different places and different people to whom staff might report, make complaints or make reports, whether anonymously or not. But if they're tied to specific schools or specific policies or practices, hopefully there's a way for you all to be receiving that feedback as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. And then lastly, I'll just reiterate that I hope that question 7 can be integrated into the algorithm in some kind of way. That's the one about whether a positive tone is being set by school leadership and making sure to get in, especially those schools, but also other schools as well, to hear directly from staff without other people in the room. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And really great work. To your point of telling people they did a good job. Good job. Thank you. This was really good information, and I did do a little informal survey. I was looking at the schools that have the restorative justice full-time people. Their climates are pretty good, and just so to the point you made about where things lie. So really appreciate it. Thanks for all the work you're doing. Happy holidays. This is, I think, the last committee before the holidays. We got it in. So everyone have a great time with family, and with that, we are adjourned.